You stop believing in yourself. And the really funny thing is that you think I'm going to tell you that's a tragedy. I'm not. You stop believing in yourself the moment someone more important than you decided you should. Maybe it was a boardroom. Maybe it was a bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. after a career you spent 20 years building quietly folded itself into a drawer and stopped returning your calls. Maybe it was subtler than that, a slow drain. A series of rooms where your opinions echoed differently than they used to. Where the person you used to be seemed to require a password you'd misplaced sometime around your 43rd birthday. And now here you are, watching a video about confidence. Let me ask you something. What did you think confidence was exactly? Because I have a very specific, very accurate feeling that somewhere in the architecture of your belief, confidence looked like approval. Like permission, like a form someone official had stamped and handed back to you, which made it real, made you legitimate, made you allowed. You've been waiting for that stamp your entire adult life, haven't you? I know a man, very serious, very decorated, who once rebuilt an entire identity after the thing he was most certain about turned out to be the very thing that broke him. Lost it all, professionally, quietly. The kind of loss that doesn't make headlines because the headlines were never about him to begin with, only about what he produced. He told me later he spent 3 years being invisible before he understood that invisibility isn't the same as disappearing. You can choose to be unseen, but you can't choose to not exist. That's where we begin. Not at the bottom. At the moment just after the bottom, when you're standing in the rubble and the rubble is completely, perfectly silent. The monster method isn't about rebuilding who you were. It never was. You know what I've noticed? No. Actually, let me put it differently. I've spent a considerable amount of time watching people lose things. Jobs, marriages, businesses, reputations, the particular way they used to walk into a room. And the loss itself is almost never the most interesting part. The interesting part, the part that tells you everything, is what they do in the 6 months after. Because in those 6 months, a person reveals whether they were ever actually themselves, or whether they were simply performing a version of themselves that the world had agreed to applaud. 40 is the audition you didn't know you were in. Here is what happened to you, specifically. You had a framework, structure, career, position, identity. They all held hands in a particular formation, and as long as that formation held, you knew what you were. Not who. What? The title. The trajectory. The reliable morning version of yourself that other people could predict. That version was comfortable. Functional. Well, reviewed. And then something broke the formation. And the question you've been sitting with ever since, the one you don't say out loud because saying it out loud would require a kind of honesty that costs more than you've been willing to spend, is, if none of that was actually me, then what exactly is left? You lie in bed, and the thoughts come in this order. I used to be good at things. No. You tell yourself, no, I am still good at things. I just haven't had the chance to prove it. But then the quieter thought, the one underneath. What if I'm not anymore? What if that version of me was a phase, and the phase is simply over? And then the most dangerous thought of all, what if everyone else already knows this, and they're just waiting for me to figure it out? That last one. That's the one running your life right now. I want you to look at that thought carefully. Really look at it. Because what it's describing isn't actually a fear of failure. It's a fear of being seen failing. It's the fear of the audience, of the specific, imagined reaction of people who, in most cases, are far too absorbed in their own quiet disasters to be watching yours with anything approaching attention. You have constructed an entire theater of judgment in your head. The seats are full. The critics are prepared. And you have concluded before the curtain even rises that the show isn't worth staging. I once knew a man, deeply committed to doing the right thing, endlessly disciplined, never once wavered from his code, who had this remarkable habit of appearing only when the situation had already been defined for him. Someone else always named the problem first. He showed up to solve it immaculately, and then retreated back to his certainty before anyone could ask who he was when nothing needed solving. A very efficient system, really. For a man who had no idea what he actually wanted from his own life. He called it purpose. I thought it looked more like performance with better lighting. But you're not performing anymore. And that's why it hurts. Because the performance had rules. The performance had metrics. A promoter, an audience, a clear measure of success. And when it stopped, you weren't left with nothing. You were left with yourself. Raw, unscripted, without the costume of competence that the career had been providing free of charge every single morning for 2 decades. And yourself turns out to be strange. Uncertain. Bigger in some places than you expected, and frighteningly small in others. So here is the real question. Not how do I rebuild my confidence? That's the question you came here with. That's the surface question. The Joker's question. The one that lives you. Underneath that one, crouching is this. What would you do? And who would you become if you stopped needing anyone's permission to exist fully? Hold that. Don't answer it yet, because the answer changes everything. You don't have a confidence problem. You have a definition problem. Confidence, as the world has sold it to you, is an emotion, a feeling of readiness, a warm internal signal that arrives before you attempt something difficult and says, yes, proceed, you're cleared for takeoff. That version of confidence is fiction. I don't mean it's rare. I mean it does not exist. The people you have spent your life identifying as confident, the ones in the rooms who spoke first, who held eye contact a second longer than was comfortable, who seemed to arrive having already decided they belonged. Most of them were not feeling readiness. They were performing it. And the performance was so practiced it looked like nature. Confidence is not a state. It is a decision. It's the decision to act before the certainty arrives. The certainty never arrives first. The certainty is always downstream, always built by action, never the precondition for it. You have been standing at the edge of your own potential, waiting for a feeling that was always supposed to come after, not before. What you actually have is not a lack of confidence. You have a mismatch between who you were trained to be and who you actually are. And that mismatch at 40-something becomes impossible to ignore because the anesthetic of a busy career is no longer running. The label is wrong. That's the beginning. When a label is wrong, you stop treating the wrong problem. Where did this start? Not the career collapse. Before that, you were trained from an age when you had no vocabulary to object to the training that your worth lived outside your body. In grades, in approval, in the measured response of the F. Aces around you when you did something. Your parents, your teachers, your first employers, none of them were cruel, necessarily. Most of them were simply passing down the only system they've been given. The system that says, perform well, be rewarded with belonging. perform poorly, and the belonging becomes conditional. And so you learned incredibly well. You became excellent at performing. You got so good at it that performance stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like identity. The role became the self. Until the role ended, and then there was nothing in the drawer where the self was supposed to be. What happened to your confidence after 40 isn't a failure of character. It is the entirely predictable outcome of a system that told you your value was a product you manufactured for other people's consumption. And then the market closed. The real origin isn't weakness. It's misaddiction. And misdedication can be corrected, but only after you've stopped blaming yourself for the diagnosis someone else wrote on your chart. The people who judge your visible loss of confidence, let's look at them for a moment, just briefly. With the lights up, what is it that judgment reveals about the judge? When someone looks at you, navigating this particular wilderness with honesty instead of performance, and decides that makes you lesser, what is that actually telling you? It's telling you they're afraid. Specifically afraid of the wilderness you're currently standing in, because they haven't survived it yet and suspect, very quietly, in the part of themselves they don't invite to dinner parties, that they might not. Your visible uncertainty reminds them of their invisible uncertainty. Your refusal to perform invulnerability makes them furious, because they have been performing it for years, and the cost is something they dare not calculate. I used to watch a man, Tremin, dashly committed, wonderfully rigid about the rules he'd set for himself, judge everyone around him by how close they came to his particular standard of discipline. He never said it, of course. He was far too principled to say it, but you could see it in the jaw. In a precise way, he turned away from anyone who was messy in the ways he feared being messy himself. He thought that distance was discernment. I thought it was the longest ongoing audit of his own terror I'd ever had. The pleasure of witnessing the people who judge your struggle are not your measurement. They are your evidence that the cage was real, that others are still in it, and that you are, however uncomfortably, on the outside of it. Here is something no one will say to you at 40, standing in the wreckage of something that used to feel solid. You know more than you have ever known, and for the first time, what you know has been paid for in full. The person who has not failed catastrophically has knowledge that is theoretical, clean, academic. They know what the books say. You know what actually happens when the books are wrong. That is not a deficit. That is an asset of such specificity and value that it cannot be manufactured by any institution, purchased with any degree, or mimicked by anyone who hasn't paid the price. The setback at 40 didn't take your competence. It stripped away the scaffolding that was hiding your actual competence from yourself. The raw, undecorated, honest version of what you can do, that version is still standing. It was always the most durable part of you. You simply couldn't see it when it was covered in titles and organizational charts and the comfortable noise of a functioning career. When this trait, this particular kind of hard-won knowing, is not suppressed or apologized for, it becomes the most decisive advantage in the room. The quiet force of someone has already survived the worst version of what everyone else is afraid of. That is not a wound. That is a weapon. And the difference between a wound and a weapon is simply which way you decide to hold it. There is a version of this experience that destroys a person. I've seen it. The man who loses something significant at 45 and turns that loss into a permanent verdict on his value. He carries it forward like an announcement. Something broken lives here, and uses it to preemptively disqualify himself from anything that requires the risk of failing again. He mistakes survived pain for proof of future limitation. That is confidence in collapse. That is knife dropped, blade up, on the floor. And then there is the other version. The man who loses something significant at 45 and decides, not dramatically, not in a speech, just quietly, in the private interior of his own thinking, that the loss is data and not destiny. He picks up the knife differently, not in a fist, not in panic, with intention, with the deliberate grip of someone who knows what the blade actually does and has decided to be specific about what he's cutting away. The monster method is not about becoming harder. It's not about building a wall around the soft parts so nothing can reach them again. A wall is a confession. A wall says, I am afraid of what will happen if I am known. The monster method is about becoming more fully, more precisely, more dangerously yourself than you were before the loss. Because the loss removed the performance, and what's left, if you're honest, is actually far more interesting. Confidence rebuilt from surviving is not the same substance as confidence that was never tested. Not remotely. One of them is decoration. The other is architecture. The language you use inside your own skull is either building the monster or sedating it. And right now, I suspect you're sedating it daily with a very particular vocabulary. Words like used to, too old, behind, too late. These are not descriptions. They are verdicts you hand down and then agree to enforce. And they are wrong. Not wrong in the soft, reassuring sense. Wrong in the precise, measurable, demonstrably incorrect sense. Replace I used to be good at this with I'm learning who I am now. That the performance is over. Replace I'm too far behind with I'm operating without the map, which means I'm navigating by actual terrain. Replace too late, and this one is important, with expensive. Everything that happened to you was expensive. That doesn't mean the budget is gone. It means you paid for something real. The internal language does not need to be positive. The Joker is not asking you to be positive. The Joker is not asking you to become an optimist. I'm asking you to become accurate because the catastrophizing, the I'm finished, I'm done, the world has moved on without me, is not realism. It is a very elaborate defense mechanism dressed up as clear-eyed thinking. If you fail before you try, you never have to feel the specific humiliation of trying and failing in front of someone. And that deal, that quiet private deal, is costing you everything. Say it differently. Say it accurately. And then, critically, say something small, do something small, and watch the language find its own new words in the space that action creates. Not every room you currently occupy was built for the person you are becoming. Some of them, and I want you to think carefully about which ones, were constructed specifically to remind you of the person you were in ways that are not useful to you, delivered by people who have a vested interest in you remaining comprehensible to them. The colleague who brings up your former role at every opportunity, not to celebrate it, but to anchor you to it. The family dinner conversation that treats your current period of reinvention as an extended bout of confusion that will presumably resolve back to the familiar. The social circles that defined you by your title and now find the definition without the title slightly uncomfortable. These environments are not neutral. They are active. They are pulling in a direction, and the direction is backward. You do not need to burn these runes down. You simply need to stop treating them as the rooms where the verdict on your value gets reached. Some people in your life were there for the performance. Now that the performance is on hiatus, they don't know where to look. That's their limitation, not yours. Stop adjusting your self-conception to fit within the frame of what makes them comfortable, and seek deliberately, intentionally, as an act of self-preservation, the rooms where what you've survived is a credential rather than an embarrassment. They exist. The people inside them are not waiting for the version of you that had it all together. They are waiting for the version that knows what breaking actually feels like from the inside. That version has far more to offer than the polished one ever did. The next time someone directly, or through the specific eloquence of their silence, implies that you are less than you were, less than you were, that your current position is a reflection of your permanent capacity, that the loss is the final word, here is what you say, internally, to yourself. 2 sentences. They are describing what they fear, not what I am. And I have already survived the thing they are afraid of, which means we are not the same. Do not say this out loud. Do not argue. Do not defend. The defense is always weaker than the certainty underneath it. Let the certainty sit exactly where it is. Private, immovable, not interested in being witnessed by people who wouldn't understand it. Anyway, certainty that needs an audience isn't certainty. It's still approval-seeking in a more aggressive outfit. The response protocol is not silence born from defeat. It is silence born from the knowledge that some battles are beneath the weight of your attention. This is not a declaration you make to anyone else. It is a decision made once, quietly, and then maintained, not with effort, but with refusal. The refusal to negotiate it. The ownership statement is this: I am not a diminished version of who I was. I am a more concentrated version of what I actually am. The loss burned away the decorative. What's left is structural. And I'm done apologizing for the structural. No drama, no announcement, no crowd to witness the decision. You make it the way you make any irreversible choice. In the private interior where it actually lives. And then you let the decision govern the behavior, rather than waiting for the feeling to give you permission. The ownership statement is not pride. Pride is fragile and comparative. It needs someone lesser nearby to confirm it. The ownership statement is posture. The physical and mental posture of a person who has decided simply that they are worth the space they take up. Not more than others. Not less. Exactly as much. Small victories confirm the decision every day. Not grand ones. Not the career resurrected overnight. You solve one small problem. You do one thing you said you would do. You show up on time. To the version of your life that is happening right now. Not the one you're mourning. Not the one you're waiting for. This one. And the monster. The real monster. The real monster. The version of you that doesn't require permission. Grows one day at a time, fed by action. Not by feelings about action. That is the method. Daily, incremental, undramatic, devastatingly effective. The world was not built to accommodate what you become after Sir. Vibing something serious? That needs to be said plainly without softening it into something palatable. The standard, the template, the recommended art of a productive life. End somewhere around 40 with you, either having arrived at a recognizable destination or being quietly reclassified as a cautionary note. The system does not have a category for the person who was broken in the middle and chose, on the other side of the breaking, to be something entirely different and more honest. You were not supposed to become more interesting after the disaster. You were supposed to become smaller, chastened, appropriately diminished, more careful, less certain of things, more deferential to the structures that outlasted your ambitions. That is what the system requires. People who, after failing, understand their role more modestly. You refusing to do that, you choosing instead to excavate the wreckage for something truer than what was there before, is not recovery in a conventional sense. It is more interesting than recovery. It is the act of someone who has looked at the approved blueprint for a life and decided, with full information and at significant personal cost, that they are not interested in the approved blueprint anymore. That is not bravery as it gets performed on stages. It is the quiet, relentless, unflattering version. The kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside. The kind that happens in ordinary rooms on ordinary days where no one is watching, and the decision gets made again and again. I am not finished. Not by this. Not by any version of this. Here is what is actually true about you right now. Not what you fear is true. Not what the collapse implied about you. What is actually true. You are the most honest version of yourself you have ever been, because the performance is over and you don't have the energy or the inclination to review it in the same shape. You are running for the first time in decades on your actual reserves, not on the institutional energy of a role that provided you with a ready-made reason to get up in the morning. You are operating with real information about your own limits and real information about your own depths, which is something no amount of success, uninterrupted, could have purchased. And the confidence you rebuild from here, if you build it correctly, if you build it the monster method way, one quiet daily victory at a time will not look like the confidence you had before. It will not be mistakable for the performed variety. It will not need a rune's acknowledgement to remain standing. It will simply be there, immovable, unremarkable. The way a foundation is unremarkable. Underground, invisible, load-bearing.